Guys, welcome back to another YouTube video. Now in today's video, guys, I'm going to be doing, as promised, the updated killer tier list. But first, of course, I do have some announcements to make. First of all, I really do apologize that I am falling behind on these videos. For one thing, I have done a lot of takes on this killer tier list. So it's kind of frustrating, but I'm really trying to get this out here. I'm already disappointed that I wasn't able to get this out before Halloween, but I did have a good Halloween, and I'm going to try to push these videos out as quick as I possibly can. I did get the new Diary of a Wimpy Kid book, and I'm already over halfway through it, so I'm almost done with it. So don't worry about that. That's going to be almost done. But you saw all the videos that are planned for the future in the community tab, so I'm not going to go over them. But if you want to see them, go check the community posts, and make sure you stay updated with the community posts for any potential changes that could be coming to the channel. And join the Discord. Link will always be in the description of every video. Other than that, let's start talking about the tier list. So, first of all, before we start this killer tier list, there are going to be a few changes to how I'm going to be basing this killer tier list off of. So obviously, the positions of this killer tier list are going to change because my opinions on the killers have changed over the past 5 or 6 months, I believe. So the one big change from last time is I'm now going to be basing this off of assuming that you are very experienced in the killer, and you have a lot of knowledge with the killer, you're very competent, etc. So that's going to be the skill aspect to the killer. We're also going to be kind of going through answering these basic questions. I'm not going to say the question and then answer it. I'm not going to do it like that because I don't know. I think that would be really boring. But I'm going to be basically filling all these questions in as we talk about each killer. So I'll just give you a run through of the questions. How reliable and oppressive is the power? Mobility, utility, meaning you know, how many different tools do they have in their base kit? Are they perk dependent? Are they add-on dependent? How impactful are their add-ons? Are they map dependent? And what is their counterplay? So those are the basic things that we're going to be going over. So I think that's all we have to cover. Let's get on to the tier list. First up, we have Trapper, and after his recent changes in the mid-chapter patch, I don't think he's really bumped up at all in the tier list. He still remains at the D tier, but his quality of life has certainly improved. For example, he's definitely not as add-on dependent, and his add-ons are a lot better. He has, he can now have more variety in his add-ons, and they are now more impactful. So that's really good for Trapper, but I don't think it has improved him at all because there are still a lot of problems that lie within Trapper. And it really sucks to put him down in the D tier because he's such a fun killer to play, but he is so outdated, and that's why he carries along so many different problems. The one big problem is the fact that there are a lot of other killers who have, I guess, a basic or similar concept behind the idea behind his power, which is essentially that you get to insta-down, because if you think about it, if your power does work at the correct time, you are basically getting an insta-down. Whether they're healthy or they're not, you're basically getting an insta-down on them. But there are just so many other killers who do the... who have that same concept that just do it a hell of a lot better. And that's because Trapper's power is extremely unreliable. It doesn't matter how good you are at Trapper, it really just comes down to how competent the survivors are. And I forgot to mention, we're going to be assuming that you are also going against really good survivors as well. So assuming you are going against good survivors, it doesn't matter if you place your traps with great precision, you place them in common spots where survivors would run through. There could be times where you only get a few uses out of your power, only impacting your game very slightly. And sometimes, and this isn't that unlikely, you won't even get a single use out of your power, making you essentially an M1 killer who wasted their time at the beginning of the game placing down traps. And because you waste a little bit of time at the beginning of the game, it can also make Trapper pretty perk dependent, because a lot of trappers, even good trappers, tend to run Corrupt Intervention. Also, he doesn't have a lot of utility. All he has is the traps, so there's not really any other little minor things that can also help Trapper besides minor things that are within his add-ons, like when you set your trap, you get a little haste effect or whatever. So his mobility is brought down even more with the fact that he has to waste a little time at the beginning of the game before he can start pressuring survivors. And his counterplay is, oh boy, it's through the roof if you're going against good survivors. Good survivors are going to pay close attention to common spots where you place your traps. They're going to disarm them, or sometimes they won't even disarm them, and they'll use the loop that you have the trap in, but they'll just go around it. And you might say, well, that does slow them down a little bit, doesn't it? Not really. It's not that impactful. They're still going to abuse that loop, even with your trap there. They're not going to care. So good survivors are going to pressure your power quite a bit, and the fact that your power is so unreliable, it doesn't matter. Sometimes your power might trigger from across the map, and even if the survivor does get injured by your power because they're healthy, it's really more bad for you than it is bad for them, because you either have to go pick that trap up, you have to reset it, or you just leave it alone, which leaves you with one less trap. So there's no real way to work around that. So Trapper, it sucks to put him at the D tier, but that's where he belongs, unfortunately. Next up is Wraith, which Wraith still remains at the B tier, although I feel he has slightly dropped in the B tier. I've seen some people put him in the C tier, but I think that's a little bit too far-fetched. I think he still remains in the B tier. He's still a pretty fairly balanced killer, but there are a few problems that have arisen over the months, which I will get to. But after his changes at the beginning of the year, he has become a lot less add-on dependent, which have made his add-ons not really as impactful because they have nerfed some of his really good add-ons. But some of his add-ons can be very impactful in certain builds, especially like Shadow Dance if you want to really go over the top with, breaking pallets really fast or something like that. But that's not really that necessary. You don't really need add-ons, which is a good thing for Wraith. Also, Wraith's mobility has significantly improved, and the special thing about Wraith's mobility is he can not only get across the map really fast, but he can also get through the map really swiftly, allowing him to monitor the map really better than somebody like Hillbilly, per se, because his mobility is really linear and only really allows him to get across the map really quickly, whereas Wraith can move across the map while cloaked with really no limit, and he can monitor all the generators, and perks and add-ons can complement his ability to monitor generators really, really well. I think is that it in terms of... No. One more thing, his utility is also pretty good. Assuming you're a good Wraith, you know all the little tricks that come along with Wraith, such as taking detours to cut off survivors, or baiting a dead hard by flicking your power, or even baiting a pallet drop with your power. So he does have a little bit of utility besides just his regular power to uncloak and get the first hit. And that being said, Wraith is really, really good at getting the first hit because of his stealth ability. Even against good survivors, they can't really, unless they have Spine Chill or some perk to affect this, they can't really avoid you uncloaking and getting the first hit, because assuming you are behind a wall to block their view, there's not really much they can do, especially if you're on an indoor map. That can significantly improve his stealth ability. So he has arguably one of the best stealth abilities in the game. And I think that's all there is good to say about Wraith. Now let's talk about some of the cons to Wraith. And this is what I was saying when I said that he has slightly fell in the B tier, because he has become more predictable over the past months. And the reason for that is because Wraith now comes down to this very boring and similar strategy amongst good Wraiths, and really Wraiths of all different skills, where they uncloak, get the first hit, cloak, and get the second hit. And this sounds easy enough. It sounds like, you're just going to steamroll the game. But if you're going against good survivors, sure, you can get that first hit really easily, but it's that second hit that's going to be difficult for you because of your predictable mind games. Typically, when you're playing Wraith while in loops, and in really, really powerful loops, your uncloaking ability isn't really going to do much for you. Getting that second hit is going to be pretty hard, which is ultimately going to slow down your game because you can't get a lot of hooks, and the survivors are going to continue to get generators done. So, even if you're a really good Wraith, this can be pretty difficult, but I think he's still in the B tier because he has a little bit of utility and a lot of mobility to complement that. So I think that's all there. No, one more thing is that in the counterplay part, if a survivor brings a flashlight, which is not that uncommon, and assuming you're going against a good survivor, they can punish you quite a bit if they light burn you, and it's pretty hard to avoid light burns during the game. So I think that's all that I have to cover for Wraith. So he remains at the B tier, although he's slightly dropped in the B tier because of his more predictable gameplay now. But yeah, Wraith, B tier. Next up is Hillbilly. And I think this change in position really comes down to my thoughts rather than the changes that came to Hillbilly a year ago. So Hillbilly is now in the B tier above Wraith. Last time I had him in the A tier. I've seen some people put him even below the B tier, like in the C tier. I've seen that quite often. Or even the D tier. I've seen people like Darva put him in the D tier. I think that's overestimating the changes that came about Hillbilly. But he really goes in the B tier now, mostly because of the change of thought that I have had with Hillbilly over the past few months. So overall, I don't think that his changes have really brought him down significantly. Now he only has a few add-ons that are really good, such as low pro chains and the overheat limit add-ons. So his add-ons aren't as impactful. He's not very add-on dependent. He was never really that add-on dependent in the first place anyway. So his add-ons not being too impactful doesn't really matter anyway. But yeah, I think that's really the only two things that have kind of gotten worse for Hillbilly. His mobility is still pretty strong. I don't think the overheat mechanic has hindered him very much. Although you can't use and abuse his power over and over again during chase. You have to be, smart in your use of your power. But if you catch survivors off guard, especially in open spots, getting that insta-down is fairly easy. But here's where the problem comes in. If you're in a strong loop, which is pretty common, good survivors are going to know to do this against a Hillbilly. They're going to find a strong loop, and they are going to basically force you to basic attack them, because it's going to take too much time to get an insta-down. You might as well just M1 them because, and the amount of time that you try to instant down them, you could just basic attack them. So good survivors are going to make it very, very difficult for you. And on top of that, you have to be very, very precise with your hits. Unlike other killers like Huntress or Nemesis, Hillbilly, his hitbox isn't as nice because his power is so linear. You have to be very, very precise with your chainsaw hits. But that being said, I think Hillbilly is still a fairly decent killer. He's definitely a lot more fun to play against because his add-ons are a lot more fair and making him ultimately a lot more balanced and fun to play against in chase. His mobility is obviously still pretty strong. If you have perks, perks like Tinkerer or Barbecue and Chili that can complement his ability to just get across the map really quickly and either pressure a survivor or pressure a generator, that can really complement his good mobility. He's not necessarily good at monitoring the map, but he is good at just getting across the map if you do have perks to, and even add-ons to complement that. He does have a little utility with his power. Much like Wraith, if you tap your chainsaw, you can bait dead hards. That's really the only other small thing that you can use for his power. He is a little bit map dependent. I don't think indoor maps kill Hillbilly. If you're on Midwich or if you're on Hawkins, you can still find little spots where you can find a straight path to get across the map. So it doesn't kill Hillbilly, but it does certainly bring him down a little bit. And I think that's all there is to cover for Hillbilly. So Hillbilly, he goes in the B tier. Next up is Nurse, and there's not a whole lot to talk about Nurse. It should be fairly obvious that Nurse goes in the S tier. And assuming you're a good Nurse, whether or not you are on console or on PC, it really doesn't matter because you are a good Nurse. We're assuming that. So Nurse. Why does she go here? It should be fairly obvious. She basically negates all of the base game mechanics that specifically in looping, she can go through walls. I mean, come on. If that doesn't explain enough, I don't know what does. So obviously she can end chases really, really quickly, and even good survivors cannot keep up with her extremely fast-paced gameplay because of her ability to end chases really, really quickly. She also has pretty decent mobility. I don't think it's the best mobility, but it is certainly above average. And she has very, very little counterplay. Really, the only counterplay that survivors have to Nurse is Dead Hard, which goes in the same category as dodging hits. That's really it. Nurse is only slightly hindered if you're on indoor maps because her line of sight isn't as big. But if you're a good Nurse, you're still going to do very, very good on indoor maps. She's not at all add-on dependent, not very perk dependent. In fact, you could probably go without perks and add-ons as a really good Nurse and still win the game against good survivors. But if you do decide to use her add-ons, especially the distance blink add-ons, those can be very, very impactful if you decide to use them. It doesn't have a lot of utility, but, I mean, all of her great positives that come with her completely override that. So, Nurse, it should be fairly obvious why she is in the S tier. Next up is Myers, and for me, Myers goes in the C tier, although I know a lot of people have been putting Myers at the top of the D tier as far as I can see. And that is solely because they think that getting out of tier 1 is like some kind of huge, huge struggle. It does make him a little bit perk dependent because some Myers tend to like to use Corrupt Intervention to compensate for that. I don't think it's completely necessary. I don't think tier 1 is that big of a struggle, although it does waste some amount of time, only slightly hindering him. The reason why he's in the C tier for me really comes down to the fact that there are other killers who have a time where they're very, very oppressive in the game, the main ones being Oni and Plague, who are just a lot better than Myers. That part of their power is just a lot better. For example, the Corrupt Purge and the Blood Wrath. It's just much, much more oppressive than Myers' ability to insta-down, plus his increased lunge, plus his increased vault speed. Which, don't get me wrong, if you run perks alongside this, like Bamboozle or Coup de Grace, it can definitely complement that quite well. But even then, it does not. It just pales in comparison to other killers who just do this so much better. And that does make him a little add-on dependent because, even though you are able to instant down, in the time that you are able to down or insta down somebody with your tier 3, you might only be able to get 1 or 2 downs with your tier 3, even with add-ons that can help with this. Also, Myers requires a lot of time invested stalking just so that you can get a few insta-downs, and it really seems counterproductive because it feels like in that time, you could just one-attack somebody and down somebody in the same amount of time that you took to stalk somebody, get to tier 3, and insta-down them. But still, if you're a really good Myers, you will take advantage of this. You will likely slug if you have the opportunity to, or it's the right time to, so that you can get several insta-downs during tier 3. And he's obviously a lot more oppressive in chase while in tier 3 because of his increased lunge and increased, increased vault speed. Also, Myers does have a small bit of utility, given that survivors can't really body block with Myers, because if you just click the stock button, yes, that's what I meant, They can't really body block because you have no collision, but that still, the survivors still do have counterplay to that, because if you are stalking a survivor up close, they'll try to go through you to prevent you from stalking, so that is counterplay that comes along with Myers. Also, survivors are going to make it as difficult as they can while you're in tier 3 to get those instant downs. So keep that in mind if you're playing Myers, and this will happen, assuming you're going against Myers, which brings him down a little bit. If you're on indoor maps, obviously this can help Myers quite a bit, because it can help you get in a good position to get a lot of stock in really, really quickly. His mobility is not really that good, which also brings him down quite a bit. Especially when he's in tier 1, he's moving really, really slowly. And when he's in tier 2, he's just a regular moving killer. I think that's all I have to say for Myers. For me, he goes in the C tier. I know a lot of people have put him in the D tier, which I think is reasonable to put him at the top of the D tier. But for me, he goes in the C tier. I think he is still a pretty oppressive killer, especially if he's in tier 3 and you are a really strong Myers. So, Myers, C tier. Next up, we have Hag. And Hag, of course, after the mid-chapter update, did undergo some add-on changes, but for the most part has stayed pretty much the same in my tier list. Hag still remains in the S tier. In fact, I think her add-ons have arguably gotten better. I think they might have nerfed a couple of them. I can't really remember, and I haven't been playing a lot of DBD since the mid-chapter patch, if I'm going to be honest with you. But I don't think her add-ons were terribly nerfed as far as I'm concerned. I think some of them were debugged, some of them were improved. I really can't remember, but that's all that really happened to her during the mid-chapter update. So that's why she's pretty much stayed the exact same since my last tier list. Her power, even against really, really good survivors who do have a little bit of counterplay against Hag. Obviously, if they bring along flashlights, which are not uncommon, they can disarm your traps. And also, they can try to get away from your traps really quickly after triggering them and bug you and make you waste more time placing down your traps. Or if you decide to put a trap in front of a hook, they might crouch to avoid triggering the trap. There are some things that they can do to try to minimize your power as much as they can. But for the most part, I think it's a fair amount of counterplay, but still puts Hag in the S tier just because of how oppressive her power is in the first place. If you set up a web of traps, or even traps throughout the map for that matter, because I know a lot of people like to say how they create a web of traps for Hag, much like how they would do with Trapper. They try to put their traps in one small condensed area, which I think is a fair way to play Hag, and assuming that you're a good Hag, you're probably going to do this. But even if you're just a regular Hag and you put the traps kind of sporadic throughout the match, or you even as a good Hag, because you're going against really, really good survivors, you find yourself having to do that because you set down traps throughout chase to try to catch the survivors in it, or get another survivor who goes to that loop again. You might find yourself falling into having to spread your traps throughout the entire map, which is not a bad thing for Hag. Hag has a very, very large teleporting distance for her traps, and with add-ons that can help even more. So yeah, Hag, her power can be very, very oppressive, and it does not require as much precision as somebody like Trapper, and she's not ruined as much if she is playing on an indoor map compared to Trapper. Her traps are obviously a lot more visible, but you can hide them around corners, and even if you put them in tight hallways, there's not really much the survivors can do, especially while in chase. So her traps aren't as bad as they would be if we were talking about Trapper in this instance. So yeah, her power can be very, very oppressive, especially if you are pressuring multiple survivors. Let's say you get to a generator and you push a bunch of survivors off of the generator, and you have a web of traps in that area, and survivors are constantly being bombarded from traps. You're teleporting left and right to different traps, and you can injure survivors very, very feasibly. And placing down traps isn't much as a hassle as it is with Trapper, because, like I said, you don't have to place them with as much precision, And instead of having to start at the match placing down traps, really, realistically, you can place down traps as you're chasing survivors, as you're going throughout the match. You don't really have to spend 1.5 to 2 minutes a game at the beginning of the game just to place down traps. Hag, you can kind of just go throughout the game placing down traps, which makes her less reliant on perks, especially like Corrupt Intervention or Slowdown perks, even though those can definitely benefit Hag quite a bit. So her add-ons can definitely be impactful, especially her iridescent add-on, the Mint Rag. If you're a good Hag and you know how to use that well, it can be very, very powerful, or things like the Rusty Shackles, the Aura Reading add-ons, the Setting Speed add-ons. All of them can be really, really good for Hag, although she is not at all add-on dependent. She doesn't really have a lot of utility, but her very, very oppressive power more than enough makes up for that. So I think that's all the things that I have to go over for Hag. Yeah, let's get on to the next killer. Next up is Doctor, and I've seen Doctor in quite a few different places on people's tier list. I've seen Doctor all the way up in the S tier for newbie console players. I've seen Doctor be at the top of the C tier somewhere, but personally, I still keep Doctor in the B tier below Wraith. I'm not really sure why people have been putting Doctor in the C tier. I think he's still a very, very oppressive killer. I think he's definitely underestimated by some because they think that survivors just have this huge advantage over him and Chase because there is just some huge counterplay with Doctor and Chase. I completely disagree with that. Now, because we're assuming that this is a really good Doctor and you're going against good survivors, of course, Doctor is going to have some good counterplay, but if you know your timing really, really well and you know how to get around survivors' gameplay, such as dropping pallets early and leaving loops early, perks can help you with that, but also just knowledge of Doctor can help you overcome survivors' counterplay to do that. On top of that, his Static Blast makes up for his mobility because he can target survivors, target multiple survivors while being a good distance away from them, distracting them off of a generator potentially, or, I don't know, cleansing a totem. Any objective that could be good for the survivors. Does Doctor have a little bit of utility? Yes, much like Hillbilly and Wraith, he can tap his shock power to bait a dead hard, which is just a very, very, very small utility. His add-ons are pretty powerful and can make his, it can make his tier 3 even more irritating. Also, some of his add-ons make things like fake pallets, which survivors tend to fall for, although I don't think it's a big game changer in Chase. His iridescent add-ons are very, very powerful. Obviously has range add-ons as well, so his add-ons are very helpful, although I don't think that Doctor is all too add-on dependent. Most of his add-ons just kind of change what the tier 3 does, and I think his tier 3 already really does enough. Most of those add-ons just make his tier 3 even more irritating with some additional small effect. His add-ons and his power are very complicated. That's why I'm not really going in that much depth. On indoor maps, especially small indoor maps, Doctor can be significantly benefited or at a significant advantage because he can cover more distance with the Static Blast. And if you run certain perks or do a certain build around indoor maps, it can make him even more oppressive and can take advantage of, skill checks that make it are harder for survivors. They counterclockwise skill checks and stuff like that, which can still catch off even good survivors off guard, but I don't think that it's that impactful. So yeah, Doctor, I think he's a pretty balanced killer, although survivors don't really find going against Doctor very, very fun, which I totally understand that, but I think he's a perfectly balanced killer who definitely has counterplay in Chase, and makes up for some of the things that he doesn't have compared to other killers. So let's get on to the next killer. Up is Huntress, and for I guess all of the time that I've been playing DBD, I've always wanted to put Huntress in the B tier. I always felt that people overestimated Huntress's just such basic power, honestly. But I I was wrong. I think Huntress's just very, very basic power can be very, very oppressive. Even if you're not a top tier Huntress and you just know you just know how to aim pretty well and you're pretty competent with her hatchets, you don't necessarily know how to snipe across the map or whatever, but you understand that when survivors are locked in position, that is your best time to get the hatchets or to throw hatchets and whatnot, which is kind of where I am at. I'm a pretty good Huntress, although I don't know how to snipe across the map. I'm not that competent. But even just a regular Huntress who's competent enough to play the game and is oppressive enough in chase can be a very, very, very strong killer. But assuming that this is a very good Huntress who knows how to snipe across the map, she can be all the more oppressive while in chase. Anytime a survivor is caught in a vulnerable position, whether they're out in the open or they're in a really good loop and they're vaulting a pallet, they're in a tight window where you can easily throw the hatchet, there are so many possibilities while in chase for Huntress to be able to get an easy hatchet hit. And her hitbox is very, very nice. You don't have to be very precise like Hillbilly. And although survivors can bring perks like Dead Hard or they can dodge the hatchets, if you are a competent Huntress, you are going to be able to find your way against that minor counterplay that Huntress has. So Huntress is very, very powerful in chase, and that more than enough makes up for her loss of mobility. Obviously, she has a large lullaby that warns survivors, but for the most part, survivors kind of just ignore the lullaby until you get into her small 20-meter radius, in which they'll be alarmed because they know that she's close. But the lullaby, because it's so big, most survivors won't be alarmed by it and will just kind of ignore it. So, yeah, I think, like I said, all that, her very, very oppressive power while in chase, even though it's so basic, so it's hard to believe that she's this powerful, more than enough makes up for some of her problems. And I forgot to mention, she doesn't really have a lot of utility. Assuming that you're a good Huntress who knows how to snipe across the map, her being on an indoor map doesn't really bring you down that far. Sniping across the map can just give you a couple more hits while, let's say, you have barbecue and chili and you want to get the hit in and then advance on the survivor. That's basically what it's going to help you in. Other than that, not being able to snipe across the map because you're on an indoor map is not going to be that bad. Her add-ons, she's not at all add-on dependent, but her add-ons can certainly help, especially the wind-up speed add-ons, the additional hatchet add-ons, stuff like that can be definitely helpful. And her add-ons have definitely improved since our last mid-chapter patch and a few other changes that happened to Huntress at the beginning of the year. I believe it was the first mid-chapter update of the year. She got some add-on changes with her iridescent add-ons or something like that. So she's undergone a lot of add-on changes throughout the past year. So Huntress, I'm very confident in putting her in the A tier now. I realize that her very, very basic power really is just that powerful. So Huntress, A tier. Next up is Bubba. And Bubba, it's really hard to decide whether or not I want to put him above or below Hillbilly because it's quite the statement to make. There is quite a debate out there whether Hillbilly or Bubba are better, but I think Bubba is better by Hillbilly by just a tiny margin. Even though Hillbilly has the mobility advantage over Bubba, in which if you're a good Bubba, you can still use your sweeping power as a little bit of a mobility, even though it's not really that particularly good. There are just other killers, obviously, who have better mobility than Bubba. But even though Hillbilly has that mobility advantage over Bubba, the fact that Bubba has a lot less counterplay while using his sweeping power and doesn't have to be as precise, even though you still have to know the distance that you have to be away from an object or from objects while in a loop, like walls and cars and stuff like that. So you have to find that perfect distance and stuff like that. I don't think he requires as much precision as Hillbilly, nor does he have as much counterplay as Hillbilly with his sweep, especially if you catch a survivor out in an open. With Hillbilly, it's still very much possible for survivors to dodge your power. With Bubba, you're pretty much screwed. There's nothing you can do. And while you are in a loop, Bubba definitely has a lot less counterplay than Hillbilly because it is easier to dodge Hillbilly's power while while in while in a loop, because once Bubba gets close enough to you, unless they are by a window or by a pallet, there's not much you can do, in which you can just easily shred through that pallet. Bubba is probably one of the best pallet shredders behind Nemesis. If a survivor decides to drop a pallet for their own safety, it only really does good for you. It doesn't take you that long to shred the pallet. So he's a very, very good pallet shredder, and the counterplay that survivors do have, like vaulting windows and dropping pallets. For one thing, the dropping pallets parts does more bad for them than it does bad for you while in chase. Only saves them a little bit more time while in chase. But as far as the windows, you can easily run perks like Bamboozle. I don't think it's absolutely needed, but it can certainly help you. His add-ons are pretty good. As far as being add-on dependent, I think he is kind of slightly add-on dependent, because you ideally do want to have quite a bit of movement speed so that you can catch up to a survivor in the case that they are by a pallet or by a window. It can be that difference between not getting the chainsaw sweep and knocking into a window, or having to eat a pallet. And getting the hit just in the nick of time. So I think he is slightly add-on dependent, especially with his movement speed add-ons and the acceleration time add-ons, like the chili that makes you accelerate faster or something like that, I'm pretty sure. So I don't think he's very add-on dependent. You can certainly go out without add-ons, but if you decide to run add-ons, they can certainly help you quite a bit. Not really that map dependent. Utility has a little bit of utility, obviously, in being able to tap his power, I think. Can he still tap his power? Because it works like Hillbilly now, right? Yeah, so he can tap his power to bait a dead hard or something like that. So he has a little bit of utility in that. I think that's really all there is to cover with Bubba. I don't really want to get into the whole face camping spindle, even though there are specific circumstances if you're a good Bubba, because obviously a good Bubba is not going to want to face camp survivors. There are specific circumstances against good survivors where even really, really good survivors can't really do much against a face camping Bubba. So if you find yourself in a bad position at the end of the game and you have a survivor on a hook, face camping as Bubba is not a bad strategy, and that is a bonus that comes along with Bubba. Very, very minor. But I just wanted to mention that to get that out of the way. Also, basement camping as well. I keep forgetting to mention that with all these killers, like Hag and Trapper and stuff like that. But yeah, Bubba, he goes in the B tier. Next up is Freddy, and Freddy was originally at the A tier last time because I thought people significantly overestimated the changes that happened to Freddy and stuff like that. I think this was even after the add-on changes that came to Freddy. I still kept Freddy in the A tier. I can't exactly remember, but Freddy is going to go down to the C tier now with Myers. I know that's a significant drop. I either put him in the B tier or the A tier last time, but either way, that is a significant drop for Freddy. This man has been all over the place in his lifetime. He used to be the worst killer, used to be one of the best and most annoying killers to go against. Well, not even annoying, just boring killers to go against. Then he had his add-ons slightly nerfed, then he had him slightly nerfed again, and then he had him completely nerfed, rendering his add-ons pretty much useless, and that's where we are at now. Freddy is kind of in the position where there's just not a lot going for him. Sure, he has a lot of utility in different spots, especially the mobility, his ability to teleport to generators, which is what puts him above Myers. I think that already puts him above Myers, given that he can get to survivors really, really quickly. And he also has a little bit of slowdown in his chase. So he has a lot of utility, but his extra utility, basically anything besides his teleportation power isn't that good. His snares / pallets aren't that good, and his slowdown that he gets from survivors being asleep is not as good as it used to be, especially with his very, very insane add-ons that he had. His add-ons, he's not that much add-on dependent, and that really is just because his add-ons suck now. there's only 2 or 3 add-ons maybe that are worth using, like the teleportation recharge rate or something like that. It allows you to get your teleportation power back quicker. I believe it was the paintings or something like that. Yeah, there's only like a couple of add-ons that are good on Nightmare. The rest are just pretty much useless. So it sucks to put Freddy down here, but I always found him as a boring killer to play anyway. He doesn't really have a lot of counterplay that comes with the survivors, and I mean, that doesn't put him up at all because he's just so boring to play, and not a lot of his powers are... The utility that he has isn't very engaging in chase at all. He's not map dependent, obviously. He can work well on an indoor map or an outdoor map. I think that's really all I have to go over with Freddy. It sucks to put him down here, but I think he's down here mainly because there's just not a lot going for him now. Really, the only good part about his power is being able to teleport to generators, which perks can complement that a little bit, but there's other killers that can use Tinker or Barbecue and Chili better than Freddy. So Freddy, yeah, just mainly because there's not a lot going for him. His add-ons aren't going to help you very much, and his side powers aren't going to help you very much either. His snares, pallets, his slowdown from his very minuscule slowdown from survivors being asleep. It's not going to do much for you. So Freddy, it sucks to put him in the C tier, but it's where he belongs. Let's get on to the next killer. Next up is Pig, and Pig still remains in the C tier, below Myers, but pretty much for the same reasons as Freddy, for being in the C tier. She really only has one good power, and that is her reverse bear traps, which even then are RNG based. So I automatically would take Freddy over Pig because, number one, being able to teleport to generators is a lot better than an RNG based reverse bear trap slowdown thing. So Pig is below below Freddy and Myers mainly because of the fact that obviously I would take a teleportation or 60 seconds of exposed extra lunge vault speed over the RNG based slowdown. Even if you're a really, really good Pig, your dash attack and your stealth ability where you can crouch isn't really going to help you that much. If the survivors have Spine Chill, they can counterplay your stealth ability, which is probably one of the worst stealth abilities in the game. It can do something for you if you have perks along with it, but you shouldn't have to run 2 perks, that being Monitor and Abuse and Whispers, just for one small ability that allows you to potentially get a hit or grab a survivor off of a generator, while having to be a really, really good Pig to do it in the first place. I just don't think it's that good. And then the dash attack, you can be really, really good with the dash attack, but in some loops, the dash attack is just darn impossible to use. Most of the time, the survivors are just going to run away if they see you crouch and try to use your dash attack. Or if the loop is too big, it's just going to be basically impossible to use your dash attack. So it can help in some particular loops, but there are just so many other killers who have little utility or their main power having them help and chase that is just better than Pig. So at least the reverse bear traps can help. They will always help at least a little bit, even if it's just a minute of time wasted on the survivors. So sometimes it will only save you 30 seconds. Sometimes it'll save you up to 2 minutes. Sometimes the survivor will just flat out die, which isn't a bad thing for you. We're not really focused on how we're satisfying the entity. But it's very, very RNG based and very, very 50-50 depending on how much value you can get out of your reverse bear traps. So yeah, Pig, it's just very unfortunate for Pig because it really doesn't matter how good you are at Pig. It doesn't really move Pig up that much on the list. It really just makes you more skilled with her utility that is very, very only works in certain instances. Pig can obviously, her stealth ability can be benefited if you are on indoor maps, which is a minor thing. Pig obviously has a lot of counterplay with the utility that she has. I think that her small utility makes up for her loss of mobility and her slowdown from her reverse bear traps. Um, she's only really perk dependent if you want to make her side parts of her power better. Um, so if you're running something like Whispers or Monitor and Abuse, I don't think Pig is that add-on dependent, but if you decide to run add-ons, they definitely can be very, very impactful. In fact, Pig has undergone some add-on changes that have made her add-ons a lot better. So yeah, Pig, I really do enjoy playing Pig. I'm going to be very, very honest with you, but just not a very great killer. It's very unfortunate because you can be super good at Pig, but it's not going to do much for you as far as making the killer more oppressive and bring you up a tier for that matter. So Pig, C tier. So next up is Clown, and Clown is going to go in the C tier above Pig. And originally, I was going to put Clown down in the D tier above Trapper, but I decided that Clown's good looping ability, considering you are a good clown, I think overrides all of the utility that comes along with Pig's power. That being said, what are the good and the bad, I guess, about Clown? Assuming that you are a good clown, I think the changes that happen to Clown have only slightly improved Clown if you are a really, really good clown who knows how to use his yellow bottles while in chase. Other than that, using it for mobility is just not the way to go. I don't think it's a smart choice. I highly recommend that if you're trying to get better at Clown, start by kind of combining using your yellow bottles and mobility, or just not using them at all. Just don't use them as mobility, and just try to use them in chase as much as possible so that you can get better with using his bottles in chase. So his mobility, I think it just has stayed the same for the most part after his changes from the beginning of the year. All that really made Clown better, which is similar to Trapper, is that his quality of life is better. His add-ons are a lot better. He's less add-on dependent. So that's good, but I don't think it has brought Clown up that much. If you're a really good clown, maybe, but not that much. And even if you are a really good clown and you know how to use yellow bottles combined with purple bottles in chase, which can make you very, very oppressive in chase, I still don't think that Clown is that good because he just pales in comparison to other killers who have the same basic concept behind their power, trying to end chases quickly, but they can just do it 10 times better. For example, Huntress, Hag, Nurse. There's just so many other killers who can do it way, way better than Clown. And Clown requires so much skill behind trying to be oppressive when chase. If you're playing as somebody like, I don't know, Hag, for example, all that it requires you to do is place traps in spots that don't even have to be that precise. You can just place them in kind of a random spot that covers a big area, and then you crawl the survivor into that area, or they just fall into it because you got lucky, and boom. You get the same amount of value as Clown, except you were working. You didn't have to work as hard to get to that same spot. So, Clown, I definitely do enjoy playing him because he does have that high skill cap, which I love high skill cap killers. I don't like killers who are just mindless freaks, where you just get free kills because, and you didn't even have to really do anything about it. So. What else is there to say about Clown? Definitely not map dependent. His add-ons can be very impactful, and he is not at all add-on dependent, especially if you're a good clown and you don't decide to use yellow bottles for the little bit of mobility that you can get. You won't be wasting any bottles unless you're using them in chase. So he's only slightly add-on dependent now, just because I think that if you're a good clown, you have to obviously combine yellow bottles and purple bottles, so it requires you to use more bottles. And also being able to reload faster. I think a lot of clowns, even good clowns, feel the need to reload constantly because they figure, well, it's only 3 seconds, but it adds up very, very quickly. So yeah, I think those were all the things that I need to mention. Anything else? Clown certainly does have a lot of counterplay as well. I guess I should definitely mention this. especially on my note that there are other killers who are a lot better, do the same thing as Clown, but just better. The fact, our Clown against good survivors, they're going to make it very, very difficult for you to get downs. When you're trying your best, as a really, really good Clown to combine the yellow bottles with purple bottles, survivors are just going to use really, really simple strategies to make it very, very difficult for you. Much like Doctor, dropping pallets early, leaving the loop before or after you throw the bottle down, simple stuff like that to counterplay your power. And obviously you can find ways around this by running perks like maybe Brutal Strength or Blood Favor, I don't know, looping perks to find your way around it, but you shouldn't have to run perks because of the counterplay that unfortunately comes along with Clown, which is good. You know, it obviously balances Clown out, but I don't think he's that terribly perk dependent unless you want to make up for that counterplay that comes along with Clown. So, Clown, I'm happy to keep him in the C tier as opposed to the D tier because before the changes, I would have definitely had him down in the D tier. But now that, assuming that you're a really good Clown and you know how to do the things that I mentioned, you should. I think I feel comfortable putting Clown in the C tier. So let's move on to the next killer. So next up is Spirit, and Spirit has only dropped down slightly in the tier. She still remains in the S tier, but I think she goes below Nurse this time around. Now, last time I had Spirit above Nurse in my tier list, and that was largely because Spirit did not have virtually any counterplay. And now that she has had her changes in the mid-chapter update, it has definitely made her a lot fairer, especially for competitive teams. And assuming that we are going against really, really good survivors, which is what this tier list is based off of, they are going to pay attention to those small details, like that dirt that's being kicked up from the ground or the directional sound effects, which can create more counterplay for Spirit while in chase. Her add-ons are also a lot more fairer now, although I don't think they're, were significantly nerfed. They changed up a few of the add-ons and made them a little bit more fun to work with and more balanced for the survivors, as well as Spirit herself. So she's only dropped below Nurse now because now she has a little bit more counterplay than Nurse in her chase. Other than that, everything else she still holds that she did before the update. She is still very, very powerful in chase despite having a little bit more counterplay. She can obviously get those downs very quickly in the same way that Nurse can, which can make it very, very difficult for the survivors to continue the game because you are getting your downs so quickly that you are going to have one person on the hook and one person who is going to have to go for that unhook, and then you can be pressuring at least another survivor, leaving only one other survivor on a generator, so you are in a pretty good position. So she's not very map dependent. Unlike Nurse, I think she does have the advantage of not being very map dependent. In fact, I think she actually strives better on indoor maps, not just because of stealth, but because sometimes it's easier to see the scratch marks on indoor maps, which can make it easier for you to find the survivors when you're phasing. And she obviously doesn't have the problem where she doesn't have as much line of sight as she would with Nurse. So she actually kind of benefits on certain maps. Her add-ons are still pretty impactful. They haven't been, significantly nerfed. They've just been balanced, basically. Not at all perk dependent, although perks can definitely help you out. Utility, her utility has definitely been cut, especially with the fact that she can't do the standstill mind game anymore, which I think is very, very fair. I don't think the standstill mind game should be something that was allowed in the game. That was a very, very stupid mind game. So she doesn't have any utility, but her mobility as well in her power is very, very powerful. Arguably better than Nurse. Just because, obviously, she doesn't go through fatigue and it's easier to control. And you don't have to run distance add-ons or, add-ons to increase your length to help with that. Your 5 seconds of phasing already is really, really impactful for your mobility. So I think her mobility is better than Nurse's in some instances, and you don't have to run really insane add-ons to get really good distance. So I think I'm going to put Spirit above Nurse just because the fact that I think her mobility is better. She does obviously have, a little bit more counterplay now. She's not as map dependent, not as add-on dependent if you do want to get better mobility. So yeah, I think I'm pretty comfortable putting Spirit above Nurse now that I think about it. But her changes have definitely made a slight impact, especially on the higher scheme of players. So yeah, Spirit S tier. Next up is Legion, and my last tier list I had Legion in the C tier. But this time I'm dropping down Legion in the C tier above Trapper. Legion, I think I overestimated him in my last tier list, and I really think the thing that brings Legion down here, because I know there are a lot of people who are big fans of Legion, who are very good at Legion, that can utilize his game stalling very, very well. They know how to do it very well. They know the perks to use. They know the add-ons to use. They know how to use his power correctly. But even if you are a really good Legion, you still have to admit, and I'm not a very good Legion, but I played a lot of Legion matches, and this happens when I am doing pretty well. Even if you do everything right, you are constantly using your power. You may think you're doing everything right, but most of the time, Legion's power, rather than stalling the game, and what I mean by stalling is, I mean, you are injuring the survivors, obviously, as Legion. This is how it should be playing out. You're injuring the survivors with your power constantly. You're getting downs, you're getting hooks, and you're preventing the survivors from doing gens because they feel the need to heal up. Right? That's what's happening, right? No. Most of the time when you're playing Legion, even if you're a really good Legion, is you get into this instance where, or this phenomenon, or you get into this circumstance in which you are using your power very frequently. You're getting successful hits with your power, because assuming you're a good Legion, it's not that hard to get hits. Most survivors can't juke you out of your power. You're getting the hits, but you are not stalling the game. You're just prolonging the game. Yes, maybe the survivors are, trying to heal up because they're injured, or maybe even some survivors are just repairing the generators. But even if that isn't the case, in best case scenario, let's say that the survivors decide that they want to heal, and you think this is a good thing because you're wasting more time for your game. But if they are constantly trying to heal, and with all of the new perks and insane medkits that is very, very common in the meta, and when they're healing really, really fast and you constantly have to use your power, usually what is happening is that the survivors are healing up really fast and you're not being able to get any downs. You're just prolonging the game. So the survivors may not be getting any generators done, but you're not doing anything either. You're not even getting any hooks because they're healing really fast, or they didn't heal and they're making it very difficult for you to get the down. It's the same instance with Wraith. You may be getting that first hit really easily, but it's that second hit that is a lot more difficult, that good survivors are going to make it even more difficult for you. On top of that, smart survivors in the first place are going to spread out to do generators, making your power a lot harder to use because you have to go from point A to point B, making Legion kind of add-on dependent if you want longer duration, or longer killer instinct range so you can see where the other survivors are. So that does make him slightly add-on dependent. His power can be used for mobility, although it's not particularly useful for mobility because it wastes your power and you have to go on this long cooldown for your power. And the 150 movement speed, it's alright, but for someone like Wraith who can use it all the time, it just pales in comparison to all the other killers who have much, much more better mobility than Legion. So he's really good at getting the first hit in chase, whether it's in chase if you're just committing to a survivor, or if you're doing a chain hit, of course, which is pretty ideal. But in most instances, what I'm trying to say is that you are not stalling the game in a sense that you're getting hooks while they're not being able to get generators. You're usually just prolonging the game. So there are times where you are going to definitely slow down the game as Legion, but most of the time against good survivors, they're going to make it very hard for you to get chain hits or the second hit, and you are going to be having a hard time getting a hook in, despite the survivors maybe not being able to get generators done. But even then, good survivors are going to not heal. They're going to focus on the generators. They're going to spread out. They're going to make it very, very difficult for you. So with good perks and good add-ons, it can certainly benefit Legion, but it's not going to bring him up a whole tier. So Legion, he goes at the D tier. Next up is Plague, which after the buffs from the mid-chapter update, I feel comfortable putting Plague in the A tier below Huntress. Plague has seen a significant buff for her base power, not her corrupt purge, but for her base power, in which now her infection time in objects has been increased, and I believe, yeah, also now when you hold your power to the bare minimum, it can't like automatically cancel, which is a good thing, and I think your movement speed during either Vile Purge or Corrupt Purge has been increased. She's also received a lot of add-on changes, so there are a lot of good stuff that have came out of Plague in this recent update, and I feel now comfortable putting her in the A tier, because when you combine her base power being a lot better now, plus her really, really powerful Corrupt Purge, if you're a good Plague, it makes her definitely A tier worthy. So initially, she really only used to be good when she was in her Corrupt Power. Assuming you're a good Plague, her Corrupt Power was always really, really, really powerful. And I don't think the fact that, you know, survivors who, obviously good survivors, they don't like to cleanse a lot, I don't think that holds back Plague a whole lot, because number one, you can run Apple add-ons, but even if you don't want to run them, you always spawn with at least one Corrupted Purge, like, ready. So even if the survivors don't, like, worst case scenario, the survivors don't cleanse at all, and you only get one use out of your power for the whole game, now that her infection time has been increased on her power, combined with your power ability to get survivors injured pretty quickly, a lot of survivors injured, so that it can make it easier for you to get that second hit. Plague, even if you don't get a lot of uses out of your corrupt power, she's still a pretty oppressive killer, especially if you are able to infect a lot of objects. Number one, that can already get the survivors infected right off the bat, so that when you enter the chase, you're already starting up that meter. And it gives you a little bit of tracking, so you don't have to run perks like Surveillance or Tinkerer. You infect the object, and now that it's increased in time, it gives you more time to leave the generator, and if you see a survivor get infected, you can come back to that generator and check on it. So she has a little bit of built-in tracking with that, which is some utility to her, as well as tracking where the survivors do cleanse, and you know where the survivors cleansed, and you know where to go to. So Plague is a lot more oppressive killer. Her add-ons are obviously a lot better. She is a little bit map dependent, especially when survivors do decide to cleanse. They're going to cleanse in fountains that are in really inconvenient spots for you, and you have to go out of your way to get your corrupt purge. That doesn't really last for very long, and your add-ons aren't really going to help with improving your corrupt purge duration. They only add like a few extra seconds. It's not really that worth it unless you run the iridescent add-on, where every time the generator is repaired, that's actually pretty worth it, despite, you know, only getting 30 seconds of your power. You get a guaranteed use of, like, or you get a guaranteed several uses of your power, which is really, really nice. But for the most part, like, add-ons aren't really going to help with your corrupt power very much, unfortunately. So she is, I think, slightly map dependent, but it's not a huge hindrance. She obviously does have counterplay. Good survivors make the choice of either cleansing or not cleansing, and if they do choose to cleanse, obviously you get more uses out of your corrupt power, and they're going to try to cleanse in spots where they make it very difficult for you. So that's kind of their best option. But if they, or I'm sorry, never mind. If they don't decide, or yeah, that is their best option. But if they don't decide to cleanse, and you, assuming you get every survivor infected, it's going to be very difficult for the survivors, especially if you're running perks like Thanatophobia or some other perks that work really, really well on Plague. If survivors don't decide to cleanse, it's going to make your chases a lot quicker because they're already injured. So I know a lot of people say that like not cleansing is better than cleansing, but I completely disagree because there's a way you can work around if you do decide to cleanse to still make it difficult for Plague to use her power. So personally, I think cleansing, if you are smart in the way you can do it, or in the places that you cleanse, is actually more effective. So Plague, I feel comfortable putting her in the A tier. The only reason she's below Huntress is just because of the fact that Huntress can be very, very oppressive all the time. There's not a specific time where she's not oppressive, or as oppressive as she would be if she was at her top, like, top power as Plague is. So that's the main reason why I put Plague below Huntress. And I think that's all I have to say about Plague. Let's get on to the next killer. Next up is Ghostface, and in my last tier list, I had Ghostface up in the B tier somewhere. I think even either below or it was above Wraith. Now, this time around, I'm going to be putting Ghostface in the C tier above Freddy. And it's because I've noticed some of the problems that are very, very prevalent in Ghostface, although I do realize that he did undergo some changes. I believe his cooldown for his stealth mode has now been decreased, so they nerfed his add-ons a little bit, his recovery speed add-ons, which have left room for him to be able to use different add-ons that are pretty impactful. So it's really only improved the quality of life, like I've said with many other killers. So his add-ons, you can use a bigger variety of them, and I think his add-ons are pretty good for the most part, but they're not going to make a extremely big impact on Ghostface. The main problem with Ghostface, which I wish they would have covered, is his wonky reveal, like, how do you want to say it? His wonky reveal physics. I don't know what you want to call it. Just the way that Ghostface gets revealed is really, really confusing, and sometimes it can be very biased towards or it can be very survivor-sided, and sometimes it can be very killer-sided. Now, typically, on the times where it's survivor-sided, it's a lot worse for you, but when it's killer-sided, it's not really that beneficial for you. Because the times where it's usually killer-sided is when you are going after one survivor, you're out in the open, and there's not any other survivors looking dead at you. But if you are, let's say, trying to hide from the survivor and expose them, and there is either only one survivor or there's multiple survivors around, it's a lot easier to reveal you in that instance. At least that's how I find it to work. So I think it's more in the survivor's favor in situations where you want to be hidden more, I guess you want to say. I think it's more survivor-sided is what I'm trying to say. And for that reason, it can be very difficult sometimes for Ghostface to get exposed, and then on top of that, getting the down after exposing the survivor. I don't think it's a really bad survivor. I don't think it's horrible. I do enjoy playing Ghostface quite a bit, but it can be pretty punishing, especially when you go through the cooldown, which has been reduced, but still you have to wait, and there's not really any way that you can wait that out. You can't really sit there awkwardly. You can't enter the chase and just wait till your stealth mode comes up and then think that you're going to easily get an exposed hit mid-chase. It's not that easy. So you want to get it while you're hidden and out of surprise. Otherwise, it's not good. Unless you do save up the juice, I don't know what you want to call it, the exposed meter for another time, and you go to chase another survivor in which you're leaving them to be able to go on the generator or whatever objective they're trying to do, so that you can go to another survivor just so that you can get an exposed hit. So personally, I think there are just other killers who obviously don't have as much of that RNG or that luck involved in getting that exposed hit. So it's much easier for other killers who have this same basic concept behind their power, which is instant downing, that works better than Ghostface. But Don't get me wrong, Ghostface does have a pretty decent stealth power. Even on outdoor maps, I think you can still get around, you know, being hidden from the survivor, and obviously when you're on indoor maps, it's very, very beneficial. His stealth power is definitely a lot better than Pig's, but it is not good as Wraith's, because obviously he doesn't have as good mobility. Being able to traverse the map and monitor the map really, really well is something that Ghostface, of course, does not have. Downing the survivors is not that hard. You don't really need add-ons to increase the amount of time that the exposed lasts. Good survivors are going to make it difficult for you to get the down or the hit, but you do have a little bit of utility in chase to help you with that. That being, if you crouch, you actually lose your red stain, no matter whether you're in stealth mode or you're not in stealth mode. So even if you're in chase and the survivors reveal you, you can use that crouching ability for some really cool mind games in chase that can make your chase that much better. And it does work pretty often, so it can help your chase quite a bit. So I don't think exposed hits is that hard, but against good survivors, expect them to make it difficult for you. I don't think you need add-ons to really help you with this, though, that much. Is he really perk dependent? No, there's not really any perks that he needs, like slowdown perks. Preferably slowdown perks, but he doesn't need something like corrupt intervention because his beginning game or his early game is really, really bad. Obviously, there is counterplay to Ghostface. You try to keep distance from him, go in strong loops to avoid the exposed hits. Pay attention once you know that it's a Ghostface. But even good survivors throughout the match, even knowing that it's a Ghostface, will get caught off guard. They won't pay close enough attention to realize that you're stalking to them, and they're pretty much doomed once they're exposed if you're close enough. So I think Ghostface is a good killer. I think he's got a lot more going for him than Freddy, certainly. But I'll put him at the top of the C tier just because there is a lot of wonkiness with his power that isn't as consistent as the B tier killers. So Ghostface, C tier. So next up is Demogorgon, arguably one of the most balanced killers in the game, and I'm not really sure if I want to put him above or below Wraith, but I think I am going to put him above Wraith just because I think he's a lot more oppressive in chase. Although his mobility isn't as good as Wraith, he still does have some decent mobility. So there is obviously a lot of utility going for Demogorgon, as well as, his power in chase and his mobility. There's overall just a lot of things going for Demogorgon. He's very balanced in chase, although he can shred through pallets really, really quickly. And if you're a good Demogorgon and you're really good at landing your shreds well, he can be very, very oppressive in chase. On top of that, he does have utility with a little bit of tracking behind his portals. And what else does he have for utility? I feel like there's a few other little tricks that you can use with Demogorgon to fake out survivors. But I suppose if you do run certain add-ons, it makes it so that you don't have to M1 all the time. Especially if you have the add-on where it reduces the cooldown of a successful shred hit. You don't really have to M1 at all because you get a 15% cooldown on your hit. So that's, I guess, a good utility. But he does have decent mobility. I don't think it's the best mobility. There are some matches where you won't really use your portals at all and you'll just use your shred. And then you'll have some matches where you'll only use your portals and you won't use your shred at all. Sometimes you get in between, but I find that most of the time you're either going to be using your portals a lot or you're going to be using your shred a lot. I don't know, maybe that's just for me. It's kind of anecdotal, but I don't think it's going to bring him down that much. He still does have, he always has that opportunity for good mobility, and add-ons can help you, keep your portals up longer. You can have more portals. Most survivors won't bother to cleanse portals all the time unless you get those really annoying survivors in which they're really just wasting their time cleansing the portals anyway. What else? There is certainly counterplay with Demogorgon, just as there is with Hillbilly. You don't have to be as precise with your hits as Hillbilly does because you obviously move faster when you shred. So it's a lot harder to dodge, and if you pay attention, especially if a survivor has an item before they're going into a window, it's easier to detect those mind games than it is with Hillbilly. So, what else? Trying to think here. I lost my train of thought there, but essentially survivors do have counterplay. You don't have to be as precise, but survivors still very much can dodge. They can drop pallets early. They can do what they feel, or they can do whatever they need to do to prevent from being downed. But ultimately, it's usually in your side anyway. If the survivor drops the pallet early, obviously that's a free pallet for you that you shred really, really quickly. Demogorgon's add-ons are definitely a lot more impactful than they used to be. I used to think that rat liver and the rat tail were really useful, but now that we have the Barb's glasses and the black heart, man, are his add-ons really, really impactful. And they buffed some of his iridescent add-ons, which are a lot better now. So his add-ons are very impactful. You do not, by any means, need add-ons on Demogorgon, but they can certainly help you. And they can save you some perk slots, like save the best for last, depending on what add-ons you're working and stuff, or you have or whatever. He's not perk dependent, but there are perks that work really, really well on Demogorgon, especially save the best for last, barbecue and chili if you have portals, all that good stuff. So Demogorgon, I find him to be a very, very balanced killer. I'm deciding whether or not I actually want to put him above Hillbilly. And honestly, I think I'm going to put him above Hillbilly. Do I want to put him above Bubba? You know what? I'm comfortable putting him above Bubba as well. And I think it really comes down to a little bit of utility, impactful add-ons, and mobility. So, yeah, overall, Demogorgon, I still find him to be a very balanced killer despite being above Bubba. And Hillbilly has, you know, counterplay that survivors can use, good survivors will use. Yeah, just a very balanced killer. I think that's the consensus that I have to make. Let's get on to the next killer. So next up is Oni, and in my previous tier list, I had Oni up in the S tier, I believe below Hag, and this time around, there's another killer who deserves that spot more than Oni, so I'm going to be putting Oni in the A tier above Huntress this time. I think I overestimated him a little bit, and the main aspect to that is the fact that good survivors at the beginning of the match, obviously you do not have your Wraith fired up. And good survivors are going to make it difficult for you to get that first hit because they don't want you to start making hits and blood orbs starting to get all over the map where you're constantly getting blood wrath. So at the beginning of the game, you're going to find it a little bit difficult to get blood wrath, but for the most part, if you're a good Oni, you're competent enough in chase at the beginning of the match when you don't really have anything to work with, you should be able to get that first hit, and after that, you are really, really oppressive. You are likely going to be constantly getting blood wrath, even if you don't have good add-ons, even though his add-ons can be very, very impactful, you're likely going to be getting blood wrath constantly, in which you're going to have insane mobility where you can traverse and monitor the map really, really feasibly, and add-ons can definitely help with that significantly, especially if you have Tinker. A Tinker Oni is very, very oppressive. Now, survivors are going to notice Tinker throughout the match. Good survivors will notice Tinker and they're going to try to avoid it, but it still doesn't change the fact that you will always know when a generator is about to be completed, and you can easily go over there, find the survivor, and even if they leave, you can easily find them and down them. And in chase, Oni is nearly unstoppable. At any angle that you can think of, Oni can probably get the dash attack in. So Oni is just absolutely insane in chase when he is in Blood Wrath. He's basically just an unstoppable threat when he is in Blood Wrath. He's got insane mobility and is very, very good in chase. As far as utility, I don't think there's really any utility that comes along with Oni, unless you're running certain add-ons like Brinjiro's Bloody Glove or some quirky add-on that, adds some weird effect, especially his iridescent add-ons. But I don't think it really has any utility, but that doesn't really matter. Not very map dependent. Counterplay, he does have counterplay when he's in chase, of course, as Oni. He's not, you can still dodge hits, but he's still a pretty formidable threat. But obviously his main counterplay is at the beginning of the game when survivors are going to try to push as long as they can for you to not be able to get a hook or a down so that you don't get your Blood Wrath really, really easily. So I think that's really all I have to cover. Not very perk dependent, but just like Demogorgon, some perks can be very, very impactful on Oni as well as add-ons. Just don't get too carried away with add-ons because some Onis get really addicted to that and it creates bad habits. But Oni, I'm comfortable putting him at the top of the A tier. next up is Deathslinger, and Deathslinger is going to go at the... Oh, boy. This is really hard to decide now that I think about it. Last time I had him in the B tier, but this time I think I'm going to put him in... Oh, boy. Where should I put him? Man. I'm going to put him in the C tier above Clown. His nerf to Deathslinger, I think, was one of the most unnecessary things ever. I mean, the fact that this killer does not have really great mobility, which is the main problem, which was one of the main problems he suffered from, just like Myers. And then they turn around and slap what he was really good at, which was being really oppressive in 1v1 chases. And it has brought him down quite significantly. And I don't know what the devs were thinking. I don't agree with the community's consensus that he was too powerful in 1v1 chase. I think that's what compensated for him not being able to not being able to traverse the map, not having really good mobility. And now that he has that 1 second delay where before he can't instantly aim anymore, it takes him at least 1 second. Obviously, it gives survivors a lot more counterplay when you are aiming your gun, which I think is fair. Originally, it was really hard for survivors to dodge Deathslinger's shots unless they had dead hard, in which they still have to just blindly guess when you're going to shoot, because they basically have no time to predict, or they have no time to react to your shot when it does happen. So I feel like it's brought him down significantly. Now his tear radius is brought up to 32 meters, so perks like Monitor and Abuse just aren't as impactful. So some of the perks that were really good on Deathslinger aren't as impactful, except for Save the Best for Last, which there are just a lot of other killers who are better with that perk, but still pretty good. I don't think he's map dependent. How impactful are his add-ons? His add-ons have been buffed, though, which is a good thing, and I think they're a lot better than they were. I think it was mainly just the bad add-ons that have been buffed that still aren't very impactful. But if you do decide to run his add-ons, I don't think they're a necessity, but they're definitely a lot better than they used to be. Also, when you, for whatever reason, break out of the survivor breaks off of the chain and you go down to that cooldown, I think it's been reduced from 4 seconds to 3 seconds if I'm not wrong. So that's a good thing. But I think despite all those, buffing his add-ons, a few tweaks here and there, I think mainly his 32 meter radius, his increase by 8 meters for his tear radius definitely has brought him down significantly, because now add-ons don't impact him as well. He's not as good of a stealth killer, being able to shoot survivors from long distances without them noticing. His tear radius music is really quiet, but still, good survivors are going to pay attention, especially if they have a good headset. So Deathslinger, it's really unfortunate the changes that happened to him, because now he's not as oppressive in chase because he has very little, or he has more counterplay now. And his mobility sucks. I mean, he's literally a 4.4 killer with a 32 meter radius. He just feels like a worse Huntress now. And I don't know why they made the changes to him. I think he's still pretty powerful in chase. He does have some utility if you're a good Deathslinger, being able to shoot between little nook and crannies. But overall, Deathslinger just... I think the changes are really unfortunate, and I don't get why that happened. So, Deathslinger, he goes at the C tier for right now. So next up, we have Pyramid Head, who is going to go... Oh, boy. This is another hard decision. Is he going to go above Plague, below Plague? Is he going to go above Huntress, below Huntress? I think I'm going to put him right smack dab in the middle. Below Huntress, but above Plague. And Pyramid Head has some really unique aspects to him that makes him a powerful killer. He has one utility in his kit that no other killer really has. He has the ability to basically counter many of the meta perks, which many of the meta perks are around being hooked. Things like Camaraderie, which is becoming more common, Decisive Strike, Borrowed Time, all those perks where a survivor gets unhooked or they are on the hook, Pyramid Head can very easily counter if the survivor gets tormented in chase, which if a survivor decides to commit to a loop, or they decide that, you know what, I've had enough trying to avoid the torment, I just have to stick to this loop, bite the bullet, and assuming you're trying to use your punishment of the damned, you can kind of just passively torment survivors. I don't really feel the need for having to randomly just place trails down where survivors are going to fall into. You can do that as a pyramid head, but I think it's largely a waste of time. You're going to torment survivors in chase, likely, and that's what you should just stick with. So that's just kind of a tip that I want to throw with you out there. But some games, I will admit, you won't get any uses out of your Cage of Atonement. And some games you will get a lot of use out of it. It's kind of 50-50, but either way, I think Pyramid Head is still really, really good, especially because of how oppressive he is in chase with his punishment of the damned attack. In spots where the survivors are locked in animation or they're in a tight window just like Huntress, Pyramid Head can easily whip his power out and get a good hit on the survivor. There's definitely counterplay with his punishment of the damned attack, but either way, I think it's still very, very oppressive. Obviously, just like any special attack that a killer has, the survivors are going to be able to dodge it in some way. But it does have some unique aspects to it, such as obviously being able to hit through walls. So if you have aura reading perks, these can work really, really well on Pyramid Head, and there's not really much the survivors can do to dodge that. Also, you can kind of, your power can go down a little bit, so on some staircases and stuff like that, you can still get the hit even if you're at an elevated height. His add-ons are not very impactful, just like Blight. He's really just good base kit. The only add-ons that are really good are the reach add-ons. Other than that, his other add-ons are just not necessary. They're not bad, they're just not at all necessary. So yeah, Pyramid Head, it's kind of 50-50 whether or not you're going to get value out of your Cage of the Atonement. But when you do, you can also get a really fast ending kill and save a lot of time caging the survivors, which makes Pyramid Head a very time-efficient killer, considering if you can get Cage of Atonement, whether you are caging a survivor or you're mooring the survivor on their last hit. It makes him a lot more time-efficient, it counters a lot of perks, and also he can be very powerful in chase. The only thing not going for him is his mobility, and yeah, that's really the only problem with him. On indoor maps, he actually thrives more because if a survivor goes around a corner and they don't see the trails, then they accidentally fall into them. So yeah, I'm comfortable putting Pyramid Head in the A tier. I feel like there was something I was going to say, and I'm going to regret not saying it after this, but Pyramid Head, A tier. So next up is Blight, and I think Blight has taken the spot of Oni from my last tier list, and I'm certainly not overestimating Blight on this one this time. Last time I had Blight at the top of the A tier, and I underestimated how powerful Blight can be. Blight goes at the S tier, and I'm not sure where exactly when I want to put him. I know I definitely do want to put him above Hag, but I'm not really sure about putting him above Nurse just yet. So Blight goes at the S tier. He probably has one of the best mobilities in the game. It's just as good as Hillbilly. Now, maybe he can't traverse as good as Wraith, but his power still recovers very, very well. It's not extremely linear if you do run certain add-ons, and at least he can get across the map really, really quickly. His mobility is absolutely insane, and perks can help with his insane mobility very well. Perks like Lethal Pursuer, Barbecue and Chili, Thrilling Tremors, Tinkerer, all really insane perks that you can run on Blight. Don't recommend running them on Blight. I don't think they're necessary on Blight, but if you just want to be that Blight who runs insane perks and add-ons, go ahead, but you absolutely do not need it. He is not at all add-on dependent. Some of his add-ons are impactful, but they are not at all needed. His recovery for his power is insanely fast. And in chase, Blight can be very, very oppressive. He can shred through pallets really quickly, especially if you have an iridescent add-on. But even if you don't, you can still easily tap your power and shred the pallet and then advance on the survivor after that. What else? Yeah, basically anytime the survivors decide to leave the loop, like in between a survivor going from one loop to another, those are the times where you are at your best and you can get those special attacks. But even when that's not the case, sometimes if you are in a loop such as the Killer Shack, the collision is going to be nice to you, and it's going to allow you to do some insane special attack hits with Blight's power, that if you're a good Blight, you should know this, and you should have map knowledge with how collision works and certain aspects. Even me, not being a very, very good Blight, knows this. Also, Blight doesn't have a lot of counterplay as well. Dodging his power, if you know how to know the correct time to hit, it's going to be very difficult for survivors to dodge you unless you make some kind of stupid mistake, or they get around a tight corner or something like that. But as a good Blight, you should be able to find your way around this most of the time. So Blight, very, very oppressive killer, and I definitely underestimated him last time. Is he map dependent? A little bit. I think he's hindered a little bit on indoor maps, just as with Hillbilly, because he can't get as much use with his mobility power. Obviously, he can't move as freely, not allowing him to traverse the map as fast. But I don't think it hinders him very, very significantly. Obviously, just like Nurse, it gives him a little bit less line of sight, but for the most part, you're still going to be a very, very oppressive killer. So Blight goes at the S tier. Next up is Twins, and Twins in my last tier list I believe was at the A tier somewhere, but now with her recent changes, I'm dropping her down to the C tier, at the top of the C tier. Man, does Twins feel a lot more punishing and sluggish to play now after her changes have happened. I still think she's a good slugging killer, and is probably you're more incentivized to slug now if you think about it, because if you obviously become Victor, and then you down a survivor, it's probably just better that you get another hit on a survivor or you down a survivor instead of going directly back to Twins, because you probably could have gotten a down with Twins in the same amount of time that you got a down with Victor, and then had to change back to Twins, and then bring Twins back to Victor. Yeah, I mean, Twins, there are those little amount of cooldown changes make her so much less time efficient and feel so punishing. And even though this killer is designed for slugging, and I think it's better if you do decide to slug if you use Victor, there are just other killers who do it better. If you're Oni and you have 30 seconds left of your power, why not traverse the map really quickly and down another survivor really quickly? I mean, it's not like you have, you're not punished for hitting the survivor successfully. Also it's insta-downable. Also, you move really, really fast. Also, it's easier to control. Also, there's less counter. I mean, there are just killers who aren't even designed for slugging that make Twins pale in comparison to her. So, I don't think she's bad in any way. She can still snowball really well if you know what you're doing, but the survivors are going to make it very difficult for you to snowball, especially if the survivors are in groups with each other, and you get a successful hit near the survivor. Guess what? They're probably going to kick you. And they're not gonna play nice either. They're gonna wait until the last second that your cooldown would end, and then they're gonna kick you, and wait for you to get crushed by Victor, then change to Twins, in which you get a second before you can move, and then you can move as Twins, and then chase the survivor. I mean, my God, there's so many cooldowns that you have to suffer through Twins that are unnecessarily long. On top of that, if you miss the survivors now, I believe the cooldown has been increased as well, especially if you, sorry about that, guys, especially if you hit an object, and miss a survivor. So, Victor can be used for mobility somewhat, but if the survivors are healthy, getting them injured and stopping them for a little bit is largely not really going to do a whole lot. Victor is only really, really powerful for a decent mobility and downing survivors. As far as injuring survivors, not really that useful. The incapacitated status effect, it's not going to do much as far as preventing the survivors from escaping or keeping them off of something for a while. There are just other killers who can do that better. So, Twins, I don't think she's a terrible killer. If you're good Twins, you know how to snowball really well. I've seen some good Twins out there who can go against competitive teams and do really well, but when you see how the competitive teams counterplay Twins, there's not really much you can do to counter that counterplay. Twins, map dependent a little bit, especially if you obviously change into Victor and Twins is in a really odd spot and you just downed a survivor. you're probably going to have to take a really, really long route to get to the survivor that you just downed. So that's why I say it's better for you to slug as twins now. Not very add-on dependent, and our add-ons aren't really all that impactful anyway. Not very perk dependent. Utility, I'm not really sure for utility wise. Mobility, a little bit of mobility here and there. Yeah, so I think that's all I have to say for twins. Let's get on to the next killer. Next up is Trickster, who luckily got a really, really nice change that I liked. Last time I had Trickster in the D tier, below Trapper, and now he is at the B tier above Doctor. Our Trickster is very, very oppressive in chase, and despite his lack in mobility, his very, very oppressive chase more than enough accommodates for that. At any chance that the survivor is caught in an open spot, you can easily just shred through the survivors, and your main event is a lot more nicer for you now and a lot better. There are times where you won't really get a good use out of your main event, but when you do get a good use out of your main event, man, is it very, very powerful, especially if survivors are in a big group with each other, or survivors just healthy, and you get one use of main event, and just like that, they are shredded down to their last health state. Very, very oppressive in chase. Does have a little bit of still does have counterplay. I think he's fairly balanced, especially in certain loops. It's more favored for survivor, and then once you get to especially longer loops, surprisingly, it's the shorter loops that Trickster struggles with, they're more favored towards you when you're in those bigger loops. So yeah, all of that more than enough accommodates for Trickster's lack in mobility. His add-ons are certainly impactful. I don't think they're as good as they used to be, especially the ones that would increase the amount of blades that you had. Those wins used to be really impactful. Now they're not as much impactful. I don't think his add-ons are really as necessary because they're just not impactful. He could use add-ons, especially ones to increase the amount of blades that he has, but they're not really impactful anyway. So you definitely have to be a lot more skilled and accurate with Trickster, which we're assuming that this is a really good Trickster, so that shouldn't be an issue for you anyway. So Trickster, they managed to make him a lot better of a killer while making him still a very, very balanced killer. So I'm very satisfied with the changes that happened to Trickster. Let's get on to the next killer. Next up is Nemesis, who is a killer that I've been getting interested in more lately. In fact, I have quit with the whole maining the Wraith thing, and I've honestly been getting addicted to Nemesis, and I'm really satisfied with this killer. Definitely one of the better killers that they made overall. Nemesis goes at the B tier, above Trickster, and if you would have asked me a few months ago, especially when Nemesis first came out, I probably would have put him in the C tier somewhere, but I'm comfortable putting him in the B tier, this time around above Trickster. And the main reason for that is obviously his mobility is a lot better, because he moves at 4.6. Well, I shouldn't say a lot better, but a little bit better. But the thing that really does compensate for that is the fact that his zombies not only provide a lot of tracking, but they also do provide a little bit of slowdown, even if you don't get a direct use out of your zombies, because the survivor's on a generator and there's a zombie harassing them, it can certainly save you a lot of time, and if you do see that a zombie is harassing a survivor, you can go over there and attack that survivor. So obviously, zombies are very RNG-based. Sometimes you won't get a lot of use out of them. Sometimes they will camp hooks, in which even if they don't hit a survivor, it can still be very, very powerful. It can dissuade a survivor from wanting to unhook right away. So zombies, despite not always getting hits, can be very powerful, and can be very impactful. And when they do get hits, boy oh boy are they very, very satisfying in chase, especially if you get a double hit. Man, is that satisfying. And on indoor maps, it can be that much more powerful because zombies will come around corners and attack survivors. Man, it's juicy. So he's not map dependent. He doesn't need to be on indoor maps to be successful, but on indoor maps, it can certainly benefit him very, very well. On top of that, he is extremely oppressive in chase. By far, the best pallet shredder in the game. I thought that Cannibal and Demogorgon were really powerful at shredding pallets when they got their buffs, but then a new killer named Nemesis came along and he said, nope, that can be beaten, and Nemesis is extremely powerful at shredding through pallets. And if you're a good Nemesis and you know how to aim right, which is a lot, obviously, it's a lot nicer to you than with somebody like Hillbilly. Getting hits is really easy, and even if you don't get the hit, especially if you're out of pallet, you still shred through the pallet really, really feasibly. So he is very, very, very oppressive in chase, and if you learn the physics, basically, behind Nemesis power, what I mainly mean is being able to strafe through walls to get the hits. You can be that much more oppressive in chase, and there's not a lot of counterplay that the survivors can do unless they're in an open area. But when they're in a locked animation or a narrow window, just like Huntress or Executioner, he's basically gotten a guaranteed hit. So, his add-ons, I don't think they're that impactful. You don't really need add-ons. I know a lot of people, they like to overestimate, you know, how long it takes them to get to tier 3. I think once you get to tier 2, which doesn't take that long, that's when you start getting pretty good. Tier 2 is the main aspect, which is, you know, obviously being able to shred through pallets, and I think that's a lot better than what tier 3 offers, which is just extra movement speed and 1 meter extra distance, which is, you know, still beneficial. It's definitely still worth getting to tier 3 for. But tier 2 is the main one that you want to strive for, and I don't think it really takes that long. You don't need something like Corrupt Intervention to help accommodate for that, just like with someone like Trapper, because you want to start getting engaged with survivors right away as Nemesis. So I think it only provides a small amount of hindrance to him and a small amount of add-on dependency, but I don't think he absolutely needs something like Marvin's Blood to help him get through the match. He can certainly run add-ons. I don't think a ton of his add-ons are very impactful. The detection range add-ons are not too bad, though. So not very add-on dependent, only slightly, but they can do something for you. Not very perk dependent either. You know, he doesn't need stuff like Corrupt Intervention, but once again, those can definitely impact you very well. He does have utility, obviously, around his zombies, which can do a lot of different things for you, and that accommodates for his lack in mobility. So, Nemesis, I feel very comfortable putting him up in the B tier, and I'm satisfied to see my new favorite killer up here as being a pretty balanced killer overall. Last but certainly not least is the Cenobite, or the Pinhead, which is another killer I am very, very satisfied that the devs made. And the Cenobite is going to go above Nemesis in the B tier. And I think that's mainly because his chain hunts, it really just all comes down to his chain hunts being better at slowing down the survivors than zombies, because the zombies can be blinded to be stopped, so they do have a little bit of counterplay there. With the chain hunts, the survivors do have to waste their time to stop the chain hunts from happening, and if they don't decide to do that, the chain hunts can be very, 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 very powerful. Also, you're very powerful in chase, obviously, with your chain summoning power, which does have counterplay. Very, very balanced for killer and survivor, but if you're a good Pinhead and you're very accurate, can be very impactful in chase. Not very map dependent. His add-ons, I don't think they're really needed as well, just because they're not impactful, and he doesn't really need add-ons anyway. Perk dependent, no. Utility, I guess his chain hunt, because it's like a side power, which can provide you a lot of slowdown. Not a lot of mobility, but his chain hunt more than enough makes up for that. So I'm very satisfied with what they did with the Cenobite just right off the bat. They didn't really have to make a lot of tweaks to him, and I think he's one of the most balanced killers in this game. It for the tier list, guys. I'm so happy that I finally got finished with this. And at the end of this video, this is a lot of parts to this video were taken on different days. I have finished with the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, the new Diary of a Wimpy Kid book, Big Shot, so I will get to making the video for that, and I'm going to start making the video for the worst to best Michael Myers masks and actors and all that good stuff. So stay tuned for the new content that will be coming, and read the community posts that you can stay updated with any potential changes. Are you guys satisfied with this tier list? Tell me your tier ranking down below. Tell me how you would have changed it, or if you disagree with some of the positions on this tier list. This is not the right tier list. This is just my tier list. So, yeah, I'm so happy I finally got done with this long video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Like and subscribe, guys, and I'll see you next time.